Hello everybody and welcome back to a brand new video where we're continuing the classic Doctor Who reviews this week, where we are looking back at the final story from season 12 of Doctor Who, Tom Baker's first season as the Doctor. It's Revenge of the Cybermen. So yes, this is in many ways quite a significant story for Doctor Who. It's the first time that we've seen the Cybermen in the show again since the very late 1960s in the Invasion, when they combined with Tobias Vaughan's character to try and conquer the Earth, but it never really quite happened. And then they were kind of just left throughout the Pertwee era. I'm not sure quite why, whether Barry Letts and Terence Dicks just didn't feel like using them particularly. They'd already done an Earth invasion unit story with the second Doctor, so it kind of and Cybermen, of course, and it didn't really make sense to have just a rehash of that in Jon Pertwee's era, when that was most of his era, was of course the unit-based stories. So it was a big opportunity to have the big return of the Cybermen for the first time in nearly 7 years. But I guess it doesn't quite maybe live up to the hype that it could have done, I think. So this of course concluded a season of bringing back monsters in many ways, when you had the return of the Centaurans in the Centauran Experiment, then the Daleks in Genesis of the Daleks, and now the Cybermen in Revenge of the Cybermen. Something that Barry Letts had decided on, that he would just kind of throw in all the old faithfuls to kind of prop up the series in case the Doctor's initial performance isn't quite as strong, or just with the new production team to have it that way. Philip Hinchcliffe wasn't very happy about that and wanted very much to be able to explore new monsters and aliens and worlds and just do things a bit differently. So he was kind of rather lumbered with all these old villains to having to be used again and didn't really want to do it. But they tried to make the best of it, and certainly in Genesis of the Daleks, for example, it really worked. But I think in Revenge, unfortunately, it didn't quite work as well. Firstly, I should say that Revenge of the Cybermen is a story that has a soft spot in my heart, because I'm pretty sure, I'm not 100%, but I'm pretty sure this is the first ever classic Doctor Who story that I saw. I think around the time of 2005-2006, when the show was just starting to air and I was getting into it. Of course, I wanted to look back at the old stuff because there was another 30 years of that, and I'm like, wow, this is crazy exciting. My mum used to work for the library where I live, and so was able to get the old VHSs out of the library to be able to watch, and I can just still picture the cover of the VHS of Revenge of the Cybermen, and I'm just sure that I watched it back then. And so I have a kind of extra element of nostalgia about that, not because I watched it when it aired, but just because it was kind of the first classic Who story that I watched. But also watching it again in the last couple of days, I've also acknowledged that there's a fair few flaws in there, I think. So yes, this story sees as the return of the Doctor, Sarah and Harry back to Nerva Beacon, that we've sort of left after the arc in space. They've beamed down to Earth for Centauran Experiment, then got whisked away over to Skaro for Genesis of the Daleks, and now finally the time ring has taken them back to where the TARDIS is supposed to be, on Nerva Beacon. But of course the timing's all a little bit out, and actually I've forgotten this fact that they turn up actually thousands of years before when they were in the arc in space. I thought it was afterwards, but actually it's way before, which is quite interesting the way it worked out that way, that the whole thing that Nerva Beacon nearly got blown up, and yet we see it in the future, so surely we must have known that it couldn't have been blown up. Did they not think about that it was never going to happen? I don't know, but it just something I was thinking about when I was watching it yesterday. But I do very much like in the first episode the kind of mystery of, we turned it back up on this Nerva Beacon, we recognise it because it's the same set, but yet there's none of the crew that we're used to, and there's loads of dead people lying around everywhere, seemingly some sort of plague or something. I mean, this brought back, there was almost kind of seeing there was a massive plague that was killing loads of people, brought back feelings of, oh my days, coronavirus. It kind of was maybe the wrong time to watch this story, shall we say. But yeah, I felt it was just a very interesting way to kind of start the story, by just having that real mysterious element, of course bringing the Cybermats into Doctor Who, which I think were used in Tomb of the Cybermen from what I remember, but I don't think they were particularly used in any other story. Maybe the Wheel in Space, I can't really remember. It's been a while since I watched that, and most of that doesn't exist anyway. But it was nice to see the Cybermats, this sort of initial introduction to the Cybermen. But I think one of the biggest kind of flaws is the lack of the use of the Cybermen for most of this story. Because I realised that in episode 1 and episode 2, they basically get one token scene that lasts, in episode 1, about 15 seconds of them on their spaceship, just staring. You see them, but they don't really say or do anything. And then again in the middle of episode 2, they have one that they're 16 minutes away from arriving at Nerva Beacon. And then it's not until the end of episode 2 that they actually properly turn up and do anything. Of course, then they do kill the Doctor. Well, seemingly kill the Doctor, but of course not. They just knock him out, because why would we kill him? We don't want to do that, even if it makes for a good cliffhanger. But yeah, just not having the Cybermen for half the story I don't think was a very good decision, particularly when you've called the story Revenge of the Cybermen, and then you haven't had a Cyberman basically in the whole story until over halfway through. That just doesn't quite work for me, I think, personally. It's a little bit of a shame. I feel like if you really wanted the big reintroduction of the Cybermen to have them as a real threat, you need them to be a much more dominant part of the story. You need more of them, because there's only 4 of them I think I ever saw on screen at one time. So that just naturally makes them less of a threat. And I don't know, they just didn't really fully work for me as villains in this story. I don't think that their kind of plan, their plot was completely ridiculous. They'd essentially kind of recently come out of a kind of cyber war with the Vogons, the planets of Gold. Gold is completely dangerous to them and will kill them all, and so they've decided, let's blow up the planet of Gold so we can never be affected by Gold again. I think that makes some sense, and I'm reasonably okay with that as a plot line. Of course, we explore the planet of Voga, this mysterious planet that supposedly is uninhabited, until we turn up there and find out there's bundles of people there. One of the problems I think with Voga as the sort of planet is that there's seemingly two different races of people. There's the kind of the soldiery people under Vorus, and then the older people under I can't remember his name, Tarkin or something like that. And it's just quite hard to differentiate between the two and what they are and what's different about them. Although their costumes are a little bit different, it still can get quite confusing in the big shootout scenes and things, and when Sarah and Harry are getting chased by all of them from the different factions of whoever they are. Ones are called like the Guardians or something, I think, maybe the more soldiery ones. I don't really know. I lose track at this point, but it was just kind of like, I love the idea of creating a big kind of alien civilization with different races and groups of people and whole sort of political shenanigans between them all and things like that. I feel like that's very, very interesting, and the sort of thing that Doctor Who can do very, very well. Just it needs firstly the time to be able to do that, which I don't think is necessarily possible in a 4-part story in the same way as a 6-parter, and it just needs the kind of well writing, but also simple things like the costumes, just making them some more substantially different, and just having the dialogue a little bit better written at points to be able to understand that these are two different kind of factions of people within the same, I think, race of Vogons, but are different people. And so I don't know, I just felt like that was a little bit of a struggle to follow at points in the story. But I didn't realise until after I watched this story that there's actually some quite sort of famous, at least in Doctor Who terms, actors in this story. There's Michael Wisher, who played Davros in the previous story, plays not the main lead in this story, but is one of the leads in I think Marek, I think he plays in this story, which is quite interesting. You have Kevin Stoney, who played Tobias Vaughan and Marvick Chen in the 60s. He's back playing whoever the kind of old dude leading everybody is, called Tyrus or something like that, or Tarkin, I can't remember his name, I'm sorry guys. And then you also have the guy, I can't remember quite his name, who plays Vorus the leader, who also plays Mordrin in Mordrin Undead in a future episode as well. So there's quite a few kind of reasonably famous Doctor Who faces throughout this story, of course under layers of prosthetics, so you can't really tell who they are, but there's quite a few different ones incorporated into the story, which is just quite kind of nice to experience. And when you read up on it and you're like, oh yeah, I do recognise him, oh yeah, I do kind of recognise his voice a little bit as Michael Wisher, for example. It's just quite interesting, I think. One of the kind of main plot problems I have with this story is, so firstly, as I say, it makes sense that the Cybermen want to blow up the Gold Planet because it's going to kill them. That makes perfect sense. What makes a little bit less sense for me personally is, firstly, they create bombs. They give the Doctor and the two people from Noah Beacon bombs strapped to their back for them to go down to Voga, and then they'll blow the planet up. Firstly, why did they send 2 Cybermen with them to a planet full of gold that's completely deadly to them? Like, that sounds bonkers as an idea. Do they really need watching when they can remotely blow up the bombs anyway? Like, is that really a requirement that's needed? I don't know, maybe not. But then secondly, why none of the Vogons think, oh, we're on the gold planet that's full of gold. The Cybermen will die if we put gold on them or throw gold at them. And yet they never think, oh, well, maybe we should use some gold. They're just going to fire their pointless machine guns at them all the time and just get murdered constantly and slaughtered. It just seemed a little bit nonsensical. I don't think I ever noticed this before, but it just seemed a little bit nonsensical why you're on a planet of gold, which is completely poisonous to the Cybermen. Why would you not use some of it that you've got available to you to mount an attack on them and destroy them? Like, that seems such an obvious thing to do. It takes until episode 4 for the Doctor and Harry to realise, oh yeah, that's maybe something we should do, and then they have a pitiful attempt at it, fail, just so that the one of the guys of Noah Beacon can blow himself up, basically, and sacrifice himself was the whole idea. But yeah, I just felt that was one of the more nonsensical parts of the plot. It kind of felt like it was plot convenient to forget that gold is completely going to destroy the Cybermen, because you're on the planet of gold, guys, and that is your planet. Why would you not use that to try and defeat the Cybermen? I just don't understand it. Maybe I'm just reading the story wrong, and if I am, please let me know in the comments below, but I just thought it was a little bit silly. But from a production point of view, I really, really enjoyed all the stuff filmed in Wookiee Hole. I think it's called Wookiee Hole or Wookiee Cave, something like that, which is where all the sort of shots on Voga, the kind of location shots on Voga are done. Those caves, they look fantastic. They're such sort of vast, cavernous caves with these kind of streams and little rivers of water running through it as well. Those silly little boats that they've got there riding on, the little kind of vehicles, car things as well. They take Harry and Sarah on, just look really, really cool and wacky. And a sort of classic Doctor Who 70s alien world type vehicles. I feel like it sort of just reminds me of that in general, I think. But yeah, from that point of view, I really, really enjoyed it, and I thought that was really benefited the story, having that elements of location filming in there as well to go with the studio scenes in Nova Beacon, and even some of the studio scenes, of course, on Voga. But I have to say, I did actually quite enjoy the ending of this story. I felt it was actually genuinely quite exciting. Firstly, seeing the missile that was supposedly going to blow up Nova Beacon, then going and blowing up the Cybermen ship, and the kind of real tension of that. And then when Nova Beacon is seemingly going to crash into Voga and blow up the whole planet. And just the way it was kind of designed with both the kind of tension of the plot, the kind of sound design as well. I think some of the shots just really, when you see them kind of pulling up Nova Beacon or kind of tilting it forwards to try and spin over the planet, it just felt genuinely really, really exciting, and what you really want from the end of a Doctor Who story. Not that the plot was brilliant, but just a very genuinely exciting and tense ending to the story where although you know they're going to survive, it still just felt really exciting. So I was really, really pleased with that actually as an ending. It felt like really quite satisfying. I was quite pleased to see it end in such an exciting and tension-filled way. One of the other interesting aspects of this story is the music, which is for a 70s story quite unusual, because most of the 70s is of course composed by Dudley Simpson. He is such an iconic, brilliant, amazing composer of Doctor Who music, who did probably 90% of music from the 1970s. But this is one of the few stories that wasn't done by that. It was done by a guy called Kerry Blyton, who had previously done the music for Doctor Who and the Silurians and Death to the Daleks in John Pertwee's era. And so Michael E. Bryant, who was the director, I believe, certainly on, I remember he did the Sea Devils, where he had somebody else come in and do all the weird special sounding sounds in that story. I think he decided he wanted his own composer, and so he brought Kerry Blyton in. And although Philip Hinchcliffe isn't very happy with the music, he doesn't think it really fits Doctor Who, I actually think it's quite alright. I think in general it has that level of kind of tension and interest to it. Although it's some rather kind of unusual sounds in places, it's quite kind of old sounding sort of instruments and very kind of basic sounding instruments, I think it's fair to say. I still feel like it works quite effectively and does really bring in the tension at certain points when it needs to. One thing I do have to say about the Cybermen is I think it's probably their weakest costume I've ever seen them in. I didn't really remember it that well up until now, but just looking at them in here, it's just so clear that it's just bits of plastic tubing that's stuck on there, sort of the sort of thing you'd get in a vacuum cleaner kind of hose or something, that's just stuck up their arms and on their head for the handles of the helmet piece. And they're just sort of grey painted bodysuit thing that just doesn't look that great. I don't know. For me, it just didn't really work that well. I feel like in black and white, maybe you could get away with it a little bit more, particularly like in The Invasion, because they're similar designs to what we had in The Invasion. But unfortunately, I just think in colour like this, particularly the black one that just looks so badly black, painted sort of as just a black paint all over it. It just doesn't really quite work for me as a costume, and I certainly know Earthshock, they really, really take a step up, I think it's fair to say. But overall as a story, it's not terrible. It's certainly not one that I dislike. I don't think it is one of the most amazing Doctor Who stories ever, but because of the nostalgia factor for me, among other things, it is one that I still thoroughly enjoyed, and I very much enjoyed watching all over again. But guys, do let me know your thoughts on Revenge of the Cybermen down in the comments below. What are your memories of it? Did you see it at the time? I'd love to hear from you if you did see it back when it aired in 1975. But also just got any thoughts on it, I'd love to hear them in the comments down below. But I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. As always, hit that like button, that subscribe if you're new here, and I'll see you again very soon for a brand new one. Goodbye.